Welcome back to Flosstubeversity, episode number 2. The purpose of these is just to help you guys gain a little bit of information to better yourself in your stitching. Today, this is part of a series of how to choose fabric that is right for you and for your project. We're going to be talking about Aida Cloth today. There are quite a few different types of fabrics that people stitch on, but the most common are Aida, linen, and Evenweave. And Evenweave is considered to be either Joblin or Lugana. And we'll talk about those in separate videos. But for Aida Cloth, it is, it's quite commonly used. It's been around for like 150 years. It was first made by a German company called Zweigart, which we all still know today. They're around, they're in many, many stores. They're quite a popular choice for Aida Cloth. Now, in terms of Aida, there's a few different things to know. So we'll go over the pros and cons of it, but we do need to also understand on fabric counts. And Aida has its very own count system. When we look at the other fabric options, their count numbers will be different than Aida. So for Aida Cloth, the most common counts that we find out there today are 10, 14, 16, 18, and 20. Now, as those counts, what does that mean? So when we look at a count, that represents how many X's you can stitch in 1 linear inch. Okay. Okay, so if you look at 1 inch worth of fabric, you will get 10 little squares in that 1 inch, and that tells you that's a 10 count fabric. Similarly, if you have a 16 count fabric, you will find that you have 16 boxes or 16 X's that you can stitch in that 1 inch. And if you have a 20 count fabric, you're going to find 20 little boxes or stitches in that 1 inch. So it's not very intuitive in the sense where you think as a count number gets larger, your stitches would get larger. In fact, it's quite the opposite. As the count number gets larger, it means that you're able to fit more stitches into that 1 inch. So the larger the count, the more stitches, which means the tinier they need to get to stick them all in that 1 inch. So for Aida Cloth, Aida is interesting because it's actually composed of 4 different very fine fibers that are woven through the warp and the weft in like little groupings of 4. And so when that happens, when those 4 coming down the warp are intersected by 4 going across the weft, that creates a little box. And that box, we're going to have a top right and left hole, and we'll have a bottom left and right hole as well. And that's where our X is going to go. I'm going to flip through some pictures as well for you guys, so hopefully the visuals will help you here. Now, with Aida Cloth, there's many, many different options in terms of colors, in terms of counts, and also whether or not you're choosing something that is pre-cut or if you're getting something custom cut at a store. So now some of the options, let's go over some of the pros first. So some of the pros to Aida is that as a beginner stitcher or a stitcher whose eyes are maybe aging, it is easy to see. It's easy to count those 4 holes and see clearly where your cross stitch needs to go. So it's easy to stitch on, which is great. Aida also is a bit of a stiffer fabric than the alternative options, and so with that stiffness, some people really like that for in hand. They say that they don't need a frame or something, a hoop or something to stretch that fabric over, that they're comfortable holding that in hand and stitching. Also, the Aida is 100% cotton. It's a natural fiber, and so when you are dealing with hand dyers, it does pick up the color very beautifully. Both Aida and linen pick up color great. It has excellent modeling if that's what the dyer is choosing to do. If you start comparing to the Evenweaves, there is rayon in that, and so it just doesn't pick up the colors quite as well. So it is a good natural option. It is. And then another thing too with Aida is that, you know, depending on what you're making, so if you're doing a full coverage project, it's excellent because it is a nice sturdy fabric for the background. It's easy to see those X's, and you can just quickly bang out a gridded or full coverage project. No problem whatsoever. It's also sturdy too, so depending on what you plan on doing with your project, if you want to make a project bag, it's a great fabric to have to help support the edge of that bag. As well, if you are stitching something that is calling for dark fabric, you can definitely go ahead and use that Aida cloth, because with the dark, it doesn't let the, you know, the matting and things that you see in the framing process shine through as they would with a linen. You know, the finer fabrics, a bit more refined, they do have more spacing between all their threads, and so you can see what is behind there. So if you're doing a dark color, go for the Aida. It has way better coverage, and where those 4 threads intersect, that little box is quite a solid box. And so if you have areas that is not full coverage, then it does offer a very nice solid background, and some stitchers really appreciate that. It's also a cost-effective option, so it's the cheapest option really out of all of your fabric choices for cross stitch. And I have some notes here. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. I think that's about all I have for the pros. But I mean, really, I think it comes down to, you know, when people are learning to stitch, it's a great option because it's easy to count, less errors, and then, you know, you don't feel as discouraged and you may continue to stitch. Now, in terms of cons, there's a few cons as well. We do find that Aida fabric is very coarse, and so there's a couple issues with the coarseness. Depending on the size of the needle you're using, your fabric or your floss can actually get frayed from Aida cloth. So if you are choosing to stitch on Aida, make sure you use a bit of a larger needle to open up those holes before your floss pulls through. Otherwise, we can find that the floss or the silks fray. Another option for that is to run your floss over some beeswax prior to stitching with it, and that also helps to prevent fraying. Aida cloth, although it does come in the higher counts like 20 and 20, 24, 28, it is harder to find those. You will have to get those from specialty needlepoint stores or cross stitch stores. You cannot get those at big box stores. What else? And like we were talking, when you have those 4 fibers that come and create that nice solid block of color there, for some stitchers, that is a con for them, because some people find that becomes quite distracting when you're looking at the final finished piece if it's not full coverage. Meaning that if you have a big block, let's say you have a big block like this, and you stitch something just in the middle, some people, not all, some people feel when they're looking at your picture here that they're drawn to this gridded background appearance. That gridded background appearance does tend to fade away if you're using a darker color, but if you're using a white color, that can be quite prominent. So just something to consider with your project. I think that's really about all I have for the cons. Yeah. Aida definitely, in my opinion, does have its place. There's a lot of stitchers that do love Aida, but it just doesn't give the refined look that some other fabric options do give you. But depending what you're making, that's not really necessarily a factor, especially if you're doing a full coverage or something like that. Now, in terms of Aida Cloth, there's a few different brands that I'll go over quickly. First one is Charles Craft, which is made by DMC, and that's found readily at all big box stores. You'll find that at, Joann's, Hobby Lobby, Michael's. They come in the big tubes and they're pre-cut and they come in a few different colors. So if you're thinking of trying out Aida, it's easy to pop down to one of the stores, grab a tube, and see how that works for you. Now, if you like that, there's a couple other brands, many brands, but a couple that we're quite familiar with are Witchelt and Zweigart, and both of those are found at needle art stores. Witchelt is a little bit rougher. So the Charles Craft is the roughest of all of the Aida out there. It's the cheapest and it's the most coarse. As the price point goes up a little bit, so does the quality of your fabric. And so with Witchelt and Zweigart is the softer of those two. Price point's the same, but you will have a higher variety of count options and color options at your needlework stores. And then if you decide that you do really like Aida, you can go ahead and check out Picture This Plus or Fiber on a Whim. They both have amazing selection of Aida, beautiful colors. They have modeling, they have opalescent. There's just some really, really gorgeous Aida out there. You just need to know where to buy it. So if you're interested, check out those two brands. They're definitely worthwhile. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the count, and conversion. So if you have a project and at the back the call for fabric is, let's say, a 32 count or a 40 count, and you think, that doesn't work. I'm looking at the Aida and I just see like 16 and 18, and that's right. So Aida has its own counting scale. If you're looking at anything else, everything else uses a different counting scale. We'll get into that in other videos, but for the purpose of this video only, all you need to do is take that number 32 and just divide it by 2, and that's your Aida count. So if it calls for a 32 count linen, you're just going to take 32 divided by 2 is 16. You need a 16 count Aida. If it calls for a 40 count linen, you're going to divide that by 2, and it gives you your count of 20. You need a 20 count Aida. It's much, much simpler than you think to do the fabric conversions. There are other things to be mindful of if you do want to do a conversion, but as long as you're sticking to the solid number of, 40 divided by 2 gives you 20. If you stick with that 20, it'll work perfect for that pattern. If you're then wanting to start changing the sizing, you do need to look at, the size of your fabric and whether or not there are anything special in that fabric, like beads, jewels, etc., because they may not fit. That's all for another video though. I hope you guys learned a thing or two about Aida. If you're contemplating using Aida, I hope this was helpful for you. And at the end of the day, just realize Aida's pretty easy to stitch on. It's readily available, and you can just pop right on down to a big box store, pick up a tube for 10 bucks, try it out. If you love it, get into that Picture This Plus or Fiber on a Whim. They're amazing, I promise you. Thanks, take care guys, have a good day.